will make a statement. You may be seated.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming at short notice. I don't need to say it, but since Naomi did not say it, this is a press briefing. The important part of it is brief, not even the ing. Last year, the government fulfilled one of its major commitment, which was to establish an Economic Growth Council. The purpose of the Economic Growth Council is to give the government critical support in establishing growth policy. Government has fairly well-defined monetary policy. Government is developing a fairly well-defined set of rules around fiscal policy, but we have not really, in our 55 years history of independence, truly developed a growth policy. And it can't be that we have a growth policy in this administration and then it changes in the next administration. We have to develop in this country a doctrine about economic growth. And so the purpose of the Economic Growth Council is to help the evolution, the development of this growth doctrine. It means that we really need agents who are not attached to an administration or who are not seen in a political light to be able to interface with the critical agents of economic growth. And in this equation, the critical agent of the economic growth that we seek is actually the public sector. The private sector is a critical partner, but in terms of the emergence of a doctrine of economic growth, we really need to get our public sector on board. So one of the major tasks given to the Economic Growth Council is to start the conversation with our agents within the public sector, our civil servants, our permanent secretaries, heads of agencies, people who are responsible for the regulatory environment in which business operates, to convene them, to get them to a point where they are communicating with each other, to get them to a point where there is commitment, and then out of that commitment, we get action. And that's critical. You would note that last year, between last year and now, the Economic Growth Council conducted some 80 meetings.
170.
Forgive me. Sorry.
170.
Well, let me rephrase, and I stand to be corrected, and happily so, that you conducted 170 meetings in this process of trying to get our public sector to develop this doctrine of growth. Now, what that means is it's absolutely important that permanent secretaries see their link in the growth equation, that the people who are responsible for issuing permits and licensing and giving approval, that they understand that a 5 days delay in their approval process could mean that we lose $1 billion investment, so that they see themselves as a part of it. The Economic Growth Council also helps to establish critical policies. And you would have seen that the Growth Council published last year a set of policy prescriptions. That's how you would describe them, as to what the government should commit to. Another function of the Economic Growth Council is to ensure that government remains true to the economic policies that it commits to, and that the public sector remains true to the economic policies that are committed to. And so Mr. Leachin, who had asked to chair and who had accepted so graciously and has taken so much of his own time and effort and resources to do this, part of his role is to help to hold the government accountable for sticking to and maintaining good economic policy. The previous government had actually developed within the Ministry of Finance a growth secretariat And that was primarily an administrative function to coordinate policies and to coordinate projects mainly that could help to spur growth. That secretariat was headed by Maureen Denton. When we took over as the administration, we believe, of course, in continuity. So we were not about to scrap everything. We took that growth secretariat, we brought it into the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation under the office of the Prime Minister, and we used that secretariat to be the secretariat of the Economic Growth Council. So in addition to developing the doctrine of growth within the public sector, in addition to building the private sector partnership for growth, in addition to holding the government to account, there is also the role of coordinating large, important projects that can add to the economic growth of the country. So all those 4 areas are covered under the Economic Growth Council. Ms. Denton resigned in August of this year, and we went through a process of, I hate to use the term headhunting, but it's a corporate term. We searched for someone who could help to manage particularly the administrative affairs of the Economic Growth Council. And the members of the council, along with myself, settled on Senator Aubin Hill. Senator Hill, as you know, has many years' experience in the banking sector and worked here in NCB, is well known in the private sector, and understands the issue of economic growth very well. I am now pleased to announce the appointment of Senator Aubin Hill as the new Executive Director of the Economic Growth Council. As I had outlined, the critical functions develop economic policy, a set of policies that finds consensus both with the private sector, the public sector, the government, to develop a doctrine of economic growth, to help with the accountability for growth, and to help with the coordination of economic growth strategies and projects across the government. That will be the main function, and as well to be an advocate. So I'm satisfied and I'm confident that Senator Hill will be able to execute the duties of the office very proficiently, but in a way that at the end of the day we can all be satisfied that Jamaica is serious about growth and that we will achieve 5 in 4. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll ask the chairman of the Economic Growth Council to give you an update.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Mr. Hill, welcome again. I first met Mr. Hill in 2002 when we had just taken over the National Commercial Bank. And the main objective then was to change the culture of NCB. The main objective today is to change the attitude, values, outlook of us here in Jamaica. That's the main objective. Mr. Hill did an excellent job in laying the foundation for what you now see as a behemoth in the financial services industry, not only in Jamaica, but now in the Caribbean. So, as we all know, success is 1% strategy. Over the last year and a half, as Prime Minister Holness said, we went through 170 meetings. The Economic Growth Council went through 170 meetings with stakeholders of Jamaica. We came up with a call to action memorandum. And right now, we are at the phase of the process whereby we have to now execute. Success is 1% strategy, 99% execution. I am excited today Because when you look at Jamaica today, we have unprecedented liquidity in the system. Now, liquidity is the oxygen that business need to be successful. We have a stable currency. And by the way, this is unprecedented. I have not seen this amount of liquidity in the system as it is today. We have a stable currency. We have not seen that for decades. We have a strong NIR reserves, and we have a stock market that's booming. So all of these parameters point to one big thing: confidence. And confidence is a precursor to success. So we today are rejoining forces with Mr. Hill, who is a known executor. And that is the reason why not an executioner. That's the reason. So for those reasons, I'm very excited today. The stable is set, and we have a gentleman who will head the secretariat, whose focus is to get the job done. Thank you very much.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm just extremely pleased to accept your appointment and to be able to be in a position to work with the Economic Growth Council, the government, the private sector, of course, and to make sure that we make those facilitatory activities that we must do to make growth happen in a place that is really ripe for growth. As Chairman Mike has just outlined, we are ready for it. I must also work with people, my small staff. It's a very small group that we're working with, to make sure that we do the right advocacy in the right places consistently, and to make sure that we're accessible to the people who want to invest, and also to work with the people who make policy. I'm looking forward to working with our permanent secretaries, and I want to make that very clear up front. They draw the checks for the government. And I want to work with them to say, look, every single check you draw, it must have something to do positively with growth, except if there's an emergency like a hurricane or, God forbid, Chick-V. Only them the two times when you talk about growth. The rest of the time, the taxpayers' money must be drawn in a version to say, how does this help growth? The Prime Minister talked about getting the culture change. Mike has talked about that. That's how you're going to get a change. The people who do the money stuff have to say, well, this affects growth. I see my good friend from Monroe College, Milverton here, the head of the development bank, will be in his feathers to say, I know what they do over there already, and they really do help. And we're going to say, all right now, how do we do more of this? We are not going to be the people who implement growth. We're not going to be the people who meet necessarily targets which are stretched. We want to move from where we are now, less than 1%, 1%, 1.6, 2.3 that we look at the Ministry of Finance, to not 5 and 4. We want really now, we have to get about 6 and 3. But we have to pass by.
Let's keep the first start.
No, I want to make sure that we understand that we have to pass through 2.3 to get to 5 and 4. So we're going to work assiduously to make that happen through the agencies who drive growth, the ministries, the government bodies, and the private sector. I'm very pleased, Prime Minister, that you've chosen me to do this. I'm certainly going to work hard at it. I'm especially pleased to work with Mike Leachin. When Mike and myself came together at NCB, the bank had a stock price of 5.65. Oh, no. 1.65. 1.65 in 19 months, it was 31.7. In two balance sheets, we moved the profits from 200 million to 3.2 billion. Patrick just declared something in the vicinity of 20 billion. Patrick and his team have done an outstanding job. So we are going to make sure now that when we take on growth, we want to see those kind of objectives met, and we're going to work towards them step by step, and I look forward, Prime Minister, to make that a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hill, also Mr. Lee Chin, and of course the Most Honorable Prime Minister. Now we'll open the floor for a few questions, ladies and gentlemen. Please raise your hand, await to be identified. Once you are, a microphone will come to you, and then you can ask your question. Please identify yourself and your media entity. Are there any questions? There's one.
Good afternoon. Stevie Simmons from Nationwide News. I have a question for the Prime Minister. How soon will you reshuffle your cabinet, and do you still have confidence in your security minister in light of the bungling of the used car contract?
Well, you know, economic growth starts when we get businesses to invest. And as Michael Leachin has said, that we are seeing all the precursors that suggest that there is confidence and there is liquidity in our financial system to invest. But that has to be paired with good projects to invest in. And people also have to feel that there is a certain level of security. The security concern is not just for the big businesses, it is more so a concern for the average Jamaican. And we are particularly concerned for the specific situation that plagues Montego Bay. And a part of the Economic Growth Council, believe it or not, we have spent quite a bit of time looking at the issue of security. In fact, we have asked the Economic Growth Council to monitor all the security agreements that we have had in the IMF program. And they have been doing a very good job to monitor that, in particular, legislation that will see a new JCF Act being put in place, and other arrangements which, Mike, I don't think we should discuss those just yet. But we are also seeking to support the security initiative through other means, which we will disclose at a later date, particularly as it relates to financing security initiatives. So the Economic Growth Council is very sensitive to the issue of security, and their advice, their views are taken into consideration because they do report to me as to what are some of the obstacles that they see, that the stakeholders report to them. Security is indeed high on the agenda. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Hi, good afternoon. Krista Campbell, TBJ. Senator Hill, what's your first order of business?
When the Prime Minister called the chairman, the deputy chairman, and myself together, he said, look, the Economic Growth Council has done a tremendous job. I mean, the conversation is about growth in the country, not even about fiscal stabilization anymore. So he said, but we have a we have terms of reference. Prime Minister, as you know, is a very disciplined man. And 2 or 3 times he said, make sure when you go in there, you follow the terms of reference, which really says that we must facilitate growth, we must be advocacy for growth, and we must make sure we set clear policies. If I were to say that what we're going to look at is you can't do 25 things at once. When we met with the Growth Council, and I see Mr. Hugh Hart here, who is a member of the council, when we met earlier this week, late last week, we said we're going to focus on a few things that we're going to make sure that those can affect growth very quickly. I'm not now at the position to say what those main things are, but there will be 3 or 4 things that we're going to look at, sort of a growth triangle with two wings. But you'll hear more about that in due course. And we're not going to be all over the place, except that as we monitor, we will monitor a great deal of things and focus on a few to make sure that growth happens, because we have to have growth.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hill. And Prime Minister?
Well, just to close, and for the benefit of the journalists who are here might be trying to wonder, why is it so important to have a growth council? There are many countries that have put in place some version of a growth council, and they do it for different reasons. For Jamaica's perspective, those of you who have studied the monetary policy history development in Jamaica, you would see that it's a long debate about the independence of the central bank, and monetary policy has evolved over time, and it is still evolving. Those of you who would have lived through the period of 2009, when we had the financial crisis and the government had to go back to the IMF, you would have heard about the big debate about fiscal discipline and putting in place fiscal rules. That's a big debate about development of fiscal policy in Jamaica. Now, you're not hearing that conversation so much because I believe fiscal policy is settled. But what we have not yet settled is growth policy. And when we say growth policy, the public might say, what is that? Is the public really interested in growth policy, other than hearing that the country hasn't grown for 40 years? So the first thing that we have to do is to ensure that the public has an understanding about economic growth, what is growth policy, and what is their role in growth policy, and that the stakeholders, the people who can make growth happen, that they're all on the same page. And there are some big ticket items which we need to settle on as a country, so that when the political cycles change, and they do change, and it doesn't have to be that a government change, you could have a different administration within a government. But if there is any change in government, what you don't want to happen is that one government starts one set of policies, and then a next government comes and then they dismiss those policies. So you really have to ensure that there is broad consensus amongst all the stakeholders about economic growth. One economic growth policy, for example, is divestment. What government assets should be divested? And when do we divest them? And does government really need to operate all the assets that it now operates? That's a conversation that needs to be had in the public domain. The stakeholders need to be a part of it, because that is a whole discussion about what should government be doing in the economy. So, for example, should government own shares or own a company that generates electricity? For example, Wigton. Should government have lands that are idle, not being used, just sitting down there on balance sheets, not being able to realize their true value? Or should the government seek to have those lands divested? This is part of growth strategy. Not everybody believes that government should pursue a divestment strategy. But we are in a democracy, so government can't just unilaterally go. Government has to build consensus. And so the Economic Growth Council is about, first of all, convening all the stakeholders, getting them to sit down at the same table, to look at the same problem, and to come to a consensus as to what are the solutions that should be brought to bear on the challenges. And so people might say, well, you've convened a talk shop, 170 meetings. In our culture, you're not going to be able to avoid talking towards a consensus. And the Economic Growth Council, in its first phase of operation, has done the convening side of things. Now, after you've convened people, then you have to connect them. The connections can happen in a symbiotic way, it can happen in an organic way, or you can put them together. So it's important that, for example, NEPA understands what the Ministry of Housing wants to do, what UDC wants to do, what the Port Authority wants to do, and they need to understand what is NEPA's role. So it's important to bring all the heads of agencies, all the people who are in charge of the regulatory bodies, to understand how their role impacts on the outcome of growth. Because government, unfortunately, operates in silos. So even though it's one government, there are different agencies. They have their own statutes, they have their own rules, and oftentimes they only work towards their own statutes and rules, not understanding. And then statutes and rules oftentimes conflict. So the role of the Economic Growth Council is to bring everybody together to see how can we remove, by better coordination and connections, the obstacles to growth. So you would hear almost every business person saying, well, it's hard to do business in Jamaica because of the bureaucracy. To change that, it is not merely a stroke of a pen. It really requires bringing together all the heads of agencies to examine their rules to see how they can make their business processes more efficient towards growth. And I think Mike has done an excellent job. The phase that we are in, Mike and the team, by the way, Mr. Hugh Hart is here, who is a member of the team. The next phase now is to use that capital that we have built in terms of convening and having connections and having commitments to bring that to bear on monitoring all the projects that can bring growth, to make sure that they happen, that they're not sitting on someone's desk languishing, that there is initiative behind projects, because many good projects come and they end up on someone's desk because there is no driver, there is no initiative, there is no interest, there is no motivation, there is no entrepreneurship to bring these projects to fruition. So the Economic Growth Council is designed to keep a register of all the projects and to call up the various persons who have charge of them to ensure that that is going. That's the administrative side of the Growth Council, which quite a bit of that will be done by Senator Hill. But then there are some other strategic things that the Economic Growth Council will have to do. And as Orbin said, you can't focus on everything. You have to narrow down to a few projects that are of strategic value that you want to get done. And so they are now tasked with looking at the slew of projects to see what are the areas of strategic interest that they will focus on. And outside of that, there is the advocacy role. And the advocacy role, yes, it's about developing the doctrine. Orbin calls it the culture, the way of thinking, but the doctrine and policy of growth. But it is also to go abroad and to advocate for businesses and investors to come to Jamaica. And we have a very good ambassador in that. Mike has a huge stake in Jamaica, and his word carries weight with his counterpart investors. And it's very important to leverage that. And I'll use this platform to say that we want other Jamaicans who have done very well overseas, who have influence, to help us to conduct our policy of paradiplomacy, to bring investors into the country, because we have the register of projects that could fit their investment needs. And this is being done in coordination with JAMPRO. It's being done in coordination with the DBJ. So it's all about bringing government together, connected on the same page, to make sure that we are not tripping over ourselves, to make sure that we don't have unnecessary obstacles, so that we can bring the country towards the pathway of growth. I am confident that we will see significant growth. Already we are seeing growth. I'm not going to be the one to be celebrating, because I'm not satisfied with that level of growth, right? But it will take some time. What I'm happy for, however, is that we're starting to see significant job creation coming out of the efforts. We just now need to see that growth. And we have set the very ambitious target, very ambitious. In fact, Mike kept that target. But I endorse it, very ambitious target of 5 in 3 years now. 3, right? So we're, but the truth is, the Jamaican public will understand that we are very serious about growth. And it is now time that Jamaica fulfill its true obligation, its destiny actually, to be a booming economy and society, to be the center of the Caribbean in terms of culture, the center of finance, the center of trade, the center of innovation, the center of art, the center of lifestyle. We can be the Singapore of the Caribbean. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. And for a customary photograph at the end, congratulating the new CEO of the EGC, Mr. Senator, beg your pardon, Aubin Hill. If we could remove the lectern. Thank you so much. Congratulations once again to the new CEO of the ECG, Senator Aubin Hill, and of course the chairman of the EGC, Mr. Michael Lee Chin. Yes, another member of the EGC, Mr. Hart, Hugh Hart. Yes, thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you so much to all the presenters, and may I wish all in the audience happy holidays.
News, current affairs, business, sports, culture and the arts.